exciting to see the beautiful attendance, so many people. I'll make it brief, as we all can't wait to hear from our guest speakers on their creative practice and the theme for this evening: artist in conversation, reimagining spaces and restoring lost histories. This panel discussion is part of the public program of events for the exhibition Kalila Wa Dimna, Ancient Tales for Troubled Times. The exhibition is currently held at P21 Gallery in London till June 11. So if you are in the UK, do visit and see the amazing work live. I'm Rania Mneimneh. I'm one of the exhibition curators. I have a background in design, art history, and social science research. I would like also to introduce my colleague Zalia, who's now busy making people in. She is the curator or the co-curator on the project, and she has a background in literature, art education, and research, and she will be moderating the discussion. Joining us later, hopefully, would be Dr. Rachel Scott. Her research was with the flagship project Language Acts and Worldmaking was the base for this exhibition. The project is funded, the whole exhibition is funded by Art Council England and Language Acts and Worldmaking. To share a bit about the exhibition, all the artworks are inspired from Kalila Wa Dimna. It's an ancient long-traveled fables, specifically about the chapter of the ring dove or the tale of the four friends. Artists and community organizations reinterpreted the tale to address pressing issues of our time. You can find out more about the tale in a nice blog on our website, www.kalilawadimnaexhibit.com. I'll share briefly about it. The main storyline is about friendship that build up through sharing stories between a crow, a mouse, a tortoise, and a deer, and a group of ring doves. It's about working together to overcome adversity represented by the human hunter and multiple other challenges that we can relate to today. The tale itself provides a perfect vehicle to explore issues of identity, community, migration, and lost heritage. So now, finally, I want to introduce the guest speakers. We have artist Vaishali Prazmari. If you can just say hello quickly.
Hello.
We have artist Rayan and Elnayal.
Hi, everyone.
And we have researcher and creative writer, Dr. Jean Morris.
Hello.
Hey, Jean. Hello. Okay, so briefly bios, I'm going to have to read to give enough credit. So Vaishali Prazmari has been exhibiting for just over 15 years. She has an MA from the Slade School of Fine Arts and is working towards a PhD from Slade as well. In her work, she incorporates elements from a variety of cultures, including her own Chinese, Indian, and Persian heritage, into vivid and detailed pieces, oftentimes inspired by miniature painting, as is in the exhibition. She recently launched an epic project on the 1001 Arabian Nights, part of her practice-led PhD, and a collaborative series called Carpet Pages. Rayan Elnayal is a Sudanese-British artist and designer based in London. She uses the skills she obtained from her architecture background to visualize and speculate on fictional spaces. She is interested in how magic realist techniques can aid in the production of ethnocentric futurisms in Sudan, Botswana, the Southwest Asian North African region, and its diaspora. Her interest in magic realism and the idea of Afrabia initially started as part of her architectural thesis at the University of Greenwich and remains an ongoing project. Since graduating, her work has been featured in several publications, and she has held 2 solo exhibitions in central London. Rayan also has participated in events around diversity in creative industries. Dr. Jean Morris' method apply creative writing practices to historical research. Her work is immersed in medieval worlds, exploring migratory themes such as radicalization, border crossing, and the lure of promised lands. Jean's explorations circumnavigate the periphery of the archive, a place where primary sources are unstable or most often absent. It's alongside these voids that she turns to storytelling and the lyrical, creating a new archive which remembers that which has been either misrepresented or omitted. So now, happily, I will leave it to Zalia to start the discussion, or maybe also the artist might want to start introducing their work. You can decide.
Shall we shall we start with that a little bit? Maybe do a little introduction of each of your work. If you're all ready, I can either designate someone, or if one of you would like to start, just show us a bit about your work. Maybe, I don't know, Jean, are you feeling up for the challenge?
I can do it. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
I just have to find the PowerPoint and share my screen.
So that way we can give everyone here a bit of an idea about our guest speaker's work. Wonderful. So Jean is now sharing her screen, and I will mute myself so you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, so you can all see that? Yes. There we go. Okay, well, that's the title, Poverty, Migration and the Consolation of Friendship. And what I've done is I've created 4 found poems, which are sort of highlighting various elements of the text that I really wanted to draw attention to. And then I superimposed some images, contemporary images of migration, or that are related to migration. So, for example, in this first one, I used an image of the scorched earth to kind of refer back to climate change and the way that that's influencing forced migration scenarios. In the second one, I used an image of a shanty town. I superimposed that over the text when the text talks very specifically about poverty and how that feels. And then the third one, I used an image of some shoes on the beach, sort of drawing attention to the things that we leave behind when we make these very precarious sea journeys. And the third one, I used a scene of barbed wire to draw attention to the fact that so many of these perilous journeys end in some form of incarceration. I also have a voiceover that accompanies these pieces, and that reads the poem, the found poem, these little bits of text, and it juxtapositions that with a report by the United Nations, the Institute of Migration. And I'm attempting there to draw attention to the different vernaculars and ways of treating a very similar predicament, which is forced migration due to poverty. So yeah, that's the installation.
Thanks, Jean. Sorry, I was struggling with my little mute button there for a second. So thank you so much for showing us the piece. So this piece, again, is exhibited at the P21 Gallery. And as Jean mentioned, there is an accompanying recording, which when you go to the gallery, you'll be able to scan your phone and scan a QR code with your phone, which will give you direct access to the recording. If you wish to listen to it now, it is actually accessible on our website, which Vaishali very kindly shared in the chat. You'll be able to see the link there. And if you just go on Dr. Jean Morris's page, you'll be able to see the recording there, listen to it. But I suggest you wait until the end of this talk. It'd be easier. What I'm going to do now, so just technicalities. Shall we stop sharing the screen? I think I can. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Jean. Vaishali, would you like to go next? Show us a bit about your work.
Sure. So I have my website. I haven't prepared any kind of presentation, but I have a website, and this is kind of work that's sort of related in some ways to the work in the show. But I'm going to just show you the work in the show quickly. So if you remember, I don't have the kind of as a full image, but actually it's quite nice to see it like this, juxtaposed together. You have the large works here on the the big works here. And then there are 4 smaller works, which are actually, I consider, actually I've done 2 pieces of work. They're 2 pieces of work, but actually in a way there are 12. So 2 pieces of work kind of multiplied into 12. So this is the 4 friends. So it's 4 separate paintings, but as one work. And these are 4 large scrolls, giant kind of scroll paintings that are reversible. So they're both sides. The 4 friends are, it's the 4 friends, the tale of 4 heads and 4 tails. They never meet. So you're constantly kind of walking around the big pieces of work, and you never quite see it as a whole. You have to experience it, and it's about the gap in between. Actually, it's about this whole, the jumping through. So you can see here, for example, the turtle is separated, it's running off, and the deer here matches another deer, and when you see it through the light, it's kind of yeah, it kind of makes Kalila Wa Dimna is a manuscript, and I wanted to kind of take it out of the book page and into space, so make them kind of sculptural. Another thing that was really nice curation by the 2 lovely curators was, which I didn't expect, this copper here. This is painted all on copper. It shines in the light. I'll just put my mouse under here, so that it just gives it this other dimension. It makes you kind of encounter it in a different way. And also the intimacy, it kind of draws you in like a jewel, kind of from going through the cave of the giant painting flags, you enter this little cave and you have this copper here right at the end, as if that's the kind of last thing. And they never meet, it's a cycle. So the mouse on this side here is connected to this mouse here. This is in a Chinese painting style, which is really from the Far East. So Chinese painting influenced miniature painting, which is in the middle. So Persian painting, Indian painting, and then, which are kind of, Indo-Persian miniatures. And then you have the oil painting from which is a Western technique, all on copper, all together in a whole, reflecting the migration of the story itself and the manuscript stories across the Silk Road. And these are, I'm interested in kind of the literacy of painting traditions, as well as, literacy in language. And there are some close-ups here as well. Is that enough for now, or shall I go on?
That's great. Thank you very much, Vaishali. So,
Sure.
again, inviting you all to go and see it live. As Vaishali said, it kind of incorporates this almost, I like the way you use the word cave, almost a cave structure in a way. So you can actually go in, and the panels, I don't know if you noticed, but the panels are double-sided. So you should definitely go in, and of course always be careful, don't touch the panels, but definitely have a look from the inside. And another thing Vaishali didn't mention is she created these beautiful little origami representations of the 4 friends, and she did it in a lovely way where the sizes are actually reversed. So the deer, which is the largest animal, is actually the smallest origami. And the way she did it allowed us to represent them as if they are jumping out of the pages onto the panels. So I won't say any more. When you go there, have fun trying to find the origamis. I think that's always a fun activity, and the children really like it. So there's that. And then finally, sorry, trying to admit people at the same time. Yay. Welcome, everyone. Rayan, can you share your screen with us? Maybe show us your piece.
Yeah, I'll do that now. Can you see that okay?
I just see
Yeah?
Rayan. Okay. Oh,
Okay.
there we go. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Rayan there, and I'm a digital artist. This is one of the pieces that I have exhibited now at P21, which I call the Mappa Mundi of Kalila Wa Dimna. And it's an A0 piece, which is essentially an abstract map of the story of the tale of the 4 friends. And I have like some of the scans of the original manuscript, which is on the public domain, kind of overlapping this map as well. And then I also have smaller components, so A3 pieces that kind of zoom into some of the components that are in the Mappa Mundi. that tell just kind of one part of the story. So this is of the ring dove, Hamam al-Matuqa, and then the story of Zirak the mouse as well. So these are the two A3 pieces, and then one which is an A0 Mappamundi. And the Mappamundi came from really having done a Mappamundi before, but when I went back to read Kalila Wa Dimna, I immediately thought this has to be a Mappamundi, just because I love the idea of telling the story via map. And yeah. Is that
Perfect.
okay? Yeah,
that is perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Ryan. Sorry, I'm just still struggling to find my mute button. So there we go. Perfect. So if you go to the gallery, you will also be able to see Ryan's two A3s, as she mentioned. So close-ups, more like unique perspectives of the ring dove and the mouse. Feel free to check out Ryan's work as well online. And please do the same for Jean and Vaishali. You can find all this information on our website. Again, there's a link in the chat. So thank you so much, all three of you, for introducing us to your work. I'm going to get started with a few questions. The structure will be really, we're trying to create a conversation. So I will ask a question. Hopefully all three of you can give us, your perspective on it. And of course, I'd just like to remind our participants that if they have any questions along the way, please go ahead, put them in the chat. We will have allocated some time at the end of this so we can address all of your questions. And it's always good to pop them in the chat so you don't forget. So I'm going to start with honestly what we kind of wanted to know from all three of you was what was it that drew you to participate in the Kalila Wa Dimna exhibition? And what did you find interesting in the chapter we focus on in the exhibition, which is the tale of the four friends? So I'll let you all begin. Maybe Rayan, since I think you're unmuted, or no, you're not unmuted, but I'll let you start.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, I was kind of very excited to work on it because a lot of my recent work, or where kind of like my art journey began, it began with Arabic literature or novels that were kind of significant in Arabic literature. And I really struggle kind of to draw from things that aren't, from Arabic literature. And so for me, that was before this was Season of Migration to the North by Tayyib Saleh. And then when I was asked to work on the Kalila Wa Dimna piece, I was kind of very excited because, like I said before, I knew immediately that I wanted to do a Mappamundi. Just from reading the story, it sounded like there were many stories also happening at once. And so I am all about non-linear narratives as well. And yeah, so it felt like it felt like a project I would have done, even if the exhibition hadn't existed actually, So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. And that's really lovely to hear. And the way you mentioned the multiple stories, which are really the stories within the story, right? That the frame story structure makes me think of Vaishali's work. And maybe Vaishali, you can tell us a bit about what drew you to this exhibition and what you liked, what you found most interesting about the chapter of The Tale of the Four Friends.
So for me, the Kalila Wa Dimna is one of a certain type of literature that is, I guess, epitomized by the 1001 Nights. So this is to do with my research, as you heard from Rania, the nested stories, tales within tales. This has fascinated me since childhood, and Kalila is exactly structured like that. What's different about the Kalila Wa Dimna to the Nights is that it was set up as a mirror for princes, so a kind of educational Aesop's fable type moral education for princes to educate these young people, which is what I found myself doing in the lockdown pandemic homeschool I set up for my children. The Tale of the Four Friends is about friendship, and for me, the kind of visual image I had when reading it was this idea of running. There's just kind of animals running and chasing each other, and the bizarre nature that these animals who kind of band together, this kind of idea of a common enemy, my friends, and my enemy's enemy is my friend sort of thing. And there was a quote right at the end of the chapter, what a strange land is this, kind of, I can't remember it fully, but it's somewhere in our email chain. What a strange bewitched land is this, but a world of genie. Kind of, he's just this hunter is just amazed, and it's a kind of sense I feel in general about the world, bewilderment. He's just astonished, and I insist on kind of continually being astonished by everything that's going on. It's what feeds my art and continues to inspire me. So that was it about the.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting, that perspective that we have. It's funny because when you look at the different perspectives in the tale, you wouldn't necessarily think of the hunter, but it's true. The hunter kind of sums it up, doesn't he? And interestingly, Jean's piece also focuses more on one of the characters, which I'll let her develop. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about, again, what drew you to the exhibition.
I was instantly drawn into not just the wisdom in the tale, but just how psychologized the characters were. And this is several hundred years before Freud. So yes, I was super keen to do something that really drew attention to that kind of thinking. And I found in The Mouse's Tale an incredibly moving and psychologized account of what it feels like to be poor and to make a decision to move because of that feeling of a lack of opportunity. So it fit really well with my own research interests.
I love that. That's really interesting. Really brings it back into the kind of the reality of our world, which is what this tale is about, even though it kind of allows us to escape, right? The magical, the animals, the imagery. So on that idea of imagery and creativities, we'd like to ask you a bit more about each of your creative process for the project. Basically, how did you approach the interpretation of the tale and the topic you decided to focus on? So Jean, you were talking about the psychology of the animals and how that can be applied in today's context, specifically in a more social aspect. But what about your creative process, maybe the actual creating of the piece? How did you go about that, from that idea that you have to the finished product?
Am I on mute now? Well, that's a really complex question. I mean, when I approach any medieval text or manuscript, I'm always on the lookout for some insight into how medieval peoples thought about migration, but also I'm also really on the lookout for continuities through time, so how similar issues are manifesting in the present day. And then I think about what would be the best way to bring those stories into circulation. And so when I read The Mouse's Tale, as I said, I was really struck by his description of poverty, and I think it called attention, for me at least, to how little we know about the economic migrant, who is a much maligned figure in the media. And I just thought, well, maybe we should think again about how we portray such protagonists. Maybe we should think again about those journeys that they're taking. And I was then discussing that with a friend who works for the United Nations, for the International Organization for Migration. And he sent me the report, which I read from in the voice recording. And as soon as I read that, I realized that they were making very similar points, but they were using completely different vernacular, so and they're both texts are aimed at governance, and they approach the subject really differently. So the mouse's narrative is really heartfelt and emotional, and it details his feelings about his predicament and how his mental health has been compromised, whereas the United Nations report focuses on the economic impact of migration, and it's very impersonal. So I just wanted to find a way to call attention to those differences, and the found poem felt like a good way to do that. So that was pretty much the process.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Rayan, can you tell us a bit more about your own creative process, which is, again, very different process because it's mostly all on a computer, right?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I work mostly on the computer. So like Rania said before, I got most of my skills from studying architecture, which is like 3 years BA and then 2 years of masters. Sorry, those are bikes outside, but yeah, so I learned how to build architectures, virtually. And so I worked in practice as well, and I designed a lot of schools. And so we would design schools, and before actually building them, we would have to visualize them and show them to clients. And I didn't have a great time in practice, and I always enjoyed what I did at uni, and I wanted to continue that. And so I treated my thesis as like an ongoing project. And so, yeah, I developed tools so if anybody knows, like softwares like Blender, Photoshop, After Effects, InDesign is what I use to create my pieces. And so, for example, in the Mappa Mundi that I showed before, some of that would have been rendered. So those are components that I build in 3D, and I give them textures, so like the brass and like the checkered texture. And then I render them, and then I'll take them into Photoshop and I'll manipulate them further. And actually it takes me, what I like about using these digital tools is that I can have kind of almost an infinite amount of iterations without kind of using too many materials. And so to get to the Mappa Mundi that I had, I would have done maybe 3 or 4 iterations. So I would have done 3 or 4 Mappa Mundis before I picked the one that I was happy with. And when I was kind of doing research on Kalila Wa Dimna, I was trying to find scans of the manuscript or just pages online that I could use. And to my luck, I actually found quite a lot on the public domain from museums. And that was really, really nice, because the Mappa Mundi, the medieval original Mappa Mundi has text in it, and it is still quite abstract, and it has like etchings. And that was perfect for me. So I have the kind of like very contemporary rendered, digitally drawn, pieces overlaid with actually texts that were written hundreds of years ago, handwritten. And so, yeah, so sometimes, a lot of times, my other pieces will also include images that I take. So because I'm Sudanese and a lot of them are about Sudan, for example, when I go to Sudan, I just make sure to document some of the things that I want to use in my images. And for Kalila Wa Dimna, those manuscripts were a really significant part of my work. And so, yeah, I hope that was clear enough.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Vaishali, in your case, so obviously, again, very different medium. Can you tell us a bit about what got you to choose those big paper panels and what was going through your mind?
So it is very different because it's a tangible thing. But actually, when Ryan, you mentioned rendering and iterations, those two actually kind of fundamental processes I work with. It's interesting, the connections, and I'm very interested in digital art as well. Miniature painting lends itself very nicely to that. So the manuscript Kalila Wa Dimna was one of the major kind of foundational texts that were often painted by the miniature painters of the past. So that was a very obvious kind of link. Yeah, so they're, famous Mongol Kalila Wa Dimna, things like that. So that was the obvious link, but then also this idea of literacy in painting traditions and the movement of the manuscript through and the stories through eras and space and time through the Silk Road led me to think of what else am I fluent in, with oils and Chinese painting. In terms of rendering is a process of kind of making the form become what it is, and that is a process. It's a word we use in English to describe a shading, for want of a better word, in miniature painting, because shading, I guess Rayan maybe would agree, because in digital arts, but shading is not the same thing quite as rendering. Rendering is just kind of making the form more of itself, and this is one of the key kind of characteristics of miniature painting without going too much into it. And then in terms of iteration, the nested tales in the 1001 Nights, stories that are very similar but have one element that's different. That's kind of an iterative process, kind of just like slowly changing every time they do it, just to show kind of all angles. I've always been like that. It's kind of very kind of very inclusive way of dealing with it. Just today, actually, just an anecdote, because I'm not at home, I'm teaching, and I asked borrowed from a student of mine, what if you had to introduce yourself through one work of art? This is borrowed from a very good student of mine. What would that artwork be? It's not your favorite painting. What would that artwork be? And I asked them that, and I answered for myself. And actually, it's not my favorite work at all. I don't like the Impressionists, but it would be Monet's painting of the Westminster Bridge at different times of day. So that's already, it's like, what is your favorite book? Well, the 1001 Nights. That's like, it's not one story, it's 1,000. You just bung in more, So I've got these two works, but actually there are 12, because they're double-sided and 4. So it's just this idea of having more, the Westminster Bridge, different times of day, 4 or 6 days past. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very interesting. So you were talking about, obviously referring to the 1001 Nights and how that was a source of inspiration. I want to kind of bring us back to the theme of the discussion, and wondering how, because obviously this relates, right? In a way, 1001 Nights are not lost, but they're, I would say, sometimes maybe forgotten. And how would you say, can you tell us a bit about your approach towards lost histories, maybe languages and these transient spaces, how you approach that in your work in general?
Well, I'll bring up miniature painting then, because that's a lost history as far as general household knowledge is concerned. People, academics I've spoken to, they think I'm painting on rice, really kind of miniature, and it's the word miniature that's a little bit problematic. Even manuscript painting is kind of set in people's minds. It's not a household name like oil painting or Chinese painting. So there's vast swathes of land from the edge of China to North Africa. There's so much. They painted too, so that's one of my sort of missions, to make it, to find it again, to not make it lost. It's 800 years of a beautiful painting traditions that I'd like to revive. I only know about the Indo-Persian ones, but there's there's Ottoman painting, there's Arab painting. I guess that's my approach to the lost histories.
Absolutely, yeah, reviving this ancient history, also your heritage, I assume, as well, a bit part of that. Yeah. Rayan, on that topic, I know you mentioned you work a lot on Sudanese literature and imagery. How would you approach that idea again of lost histories, languages, transient spaces in your work, which is space obviously very, very present in your work?
Yeah, lost histories is interesting to me, because I always felt like Sudan had quite a lot of lost and kind of disrespected, I don't know, histories. It's not kind of spoken about enough. But when I was doing my thesis, I was talking about magic realism, and the reason why I became drawn to magic realism in all my works is because I kept reading about it, and I kept reading about how novelists liked using magic realism as well, and how it was a language of post-colonial artists and writers. and how it was a language for the people who have not been, haven't had a voice. It's a language for the voiceless. And so magic realism, for me, is a great language of which where you can use both reality and fiction to tell stories that are slightly unfamiliar, and sometimes even in an unconventional way. And so for me, magic realism is great at telling lost stories. So yeah, and for me, lost histories is like it's also our story. So it's like through art, it's an opportunity to tell your own story through that as well. Yeah, again, I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I believe it's a theme that also comes up actually in Jean's piece. Sorry, just admitting someone. Yeah, I believe there is quite a bit of your own heritage that comes up. Is this something that you associate with the lost history, or is that actually, am I completely misinterpreting this?
No, not at all. And I was actually really nodding away when Rayan was speaking, because I couldn't agree more. And I think sometimes when you're dealing with lost histories, it's easier to, well, it's not easier, it's just, it's rather than try and sort of recover those voices in a sort of prosaic documentary style way, it feels more fair to turn to the lyrical and to turn to magic realism, because you are doing something that's other than history, really. So, and in terms of my own work, you know, representing the underrepresented or the spectral, it's a massive theme for me throughout everything I do. So finding and locating those marginalized and silent presences in the archive, and then memorializing those presences through creative writing practices. And especially, you know, I do also move into the lyrical and into magic realism when I do that. It's just a core part of my method. And I'm kind of, I guess, advocating for a certain kind of rigorous and responsible form of storytelling. So, you know, that can bring these lost characters into our field of vision. But it's also storytelling that can sit alongside other modes of inquiry. So not replace history, but to sit alongside history, or even the economic, as I attempted to do with my installation. So yeah, you know, it's a storytelling which is kind of self-reflective. It wears its processes and research methods on its sleeve, but it's also aesthetic. You know, it's also highly aestheticized.
Absolutely. I love that you brought up that subject of storytelling as a way of telling the world we live in, right? That the fiction that helps narrate reality in a way, and it actually was kind of my next question, which Jean, I'd be curious to hear what you think about it, because obviously storytelling, these tales, and they are a symbol of how storytelling is passed on for generations, and how important it is in our societies as a whole. But I wonder how you imagine the future, the evolution of storytelling, you know, in this age of constant stimulation, you know, instant gratification. Where is there still a place for storytelling, and what will it maybe look like?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a really big question, and I've been thinking about it a lot, actually, because we are now seeing, you know, the arts and humanities under siege in a university context. So that's really worrying, and we need storytelling to ask, you know, to kind of encourage these critical and analytical skills that are associated with the study of literature, and, you know, sort of literature asks big questions like, who is narrating and why? You know, how does place and environment contribute to how ideas are represented? Even things like, you know, how do underlying plot structures guide our thinking in various mediated platforms? So you know, these questions are really vital, you know, when we're dealing with a world full of fake news. And they are addressed through literature and storytelling. And I feel slightly despairing that these skills and subjects are not made more of. But what I do know, on a more positive note, is that creative writing is still a very popular, and it's a growing area in the university context, at least, and beyond. So maybe through the discipline of creative writing or creative methodologies, we can do some of the work that can salvage some of the disciplines that are flailing right now, such as history is another one. So yeah, I'm just keen to advocate for creative writing techniques, and, you know, have them sit alongside any discipline. You know, my installation mentions the constellation of friendship, and some of that friendship is a friendship between disciplines, I think, too.
I love that, friendship between disciplines. It's funny because when you talk of the future of creative writing, I know this is going to sound terrible, but I immediately think, and ironically, I'm not on Twitter, but I think of Twitter. You know, I think of new modes of writing, and how can we tell stories. I like to follow little platforms where they write short stories, you know, just in a post, and you know, how it can have an impact. And it makes me think of the way we're representing art nowadays, you know, digital art, and please bear with me, I'm not very knowledgeable at this, but I'm thinking of NFTs, for example, which brings me back to Rayan, and maybe because Rayan, you are dabbling in this new space, right? Blockchain, NFTs, etc. I wonder if that represents a new way of storytelling, of visual storytelling, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as much as I'm kind of interested in NFTs and blockchain technology, I find it also quite scary because it's there. I mean, the whole point is that it's there and there forever, especially if it gets kind of sold. It's not something that you can kind of buy back or remove or burn quite easily. And that is the whole point. But then it's creating a platform for archiving and documentation in a very kind of secure way. So what I'm seeing now is very interesting because people are documenting novels, you know, spoken word, poetry, animation, film, fine art, and more on the blockchain. And I think that is allowing for like a kind of, it engages with the technology we have to document and archive the artworks and stories of actually very, very regular people. You don't have to have access to museum resources or like university resources to do that. You can essentially publish your work on there for people to view and people to understand and people to consume, but one that always kind of ties back to the creator and gives credit to the creator. So I find that quite interesting. And yeah, I guess digital art as well for me is interesting because it kind of, it's part of that kind of whole realm of like, you know, social media where, you know, we're used to TikToks or Reels or, you know, like, you know, make a 7-second video, not more than that, or, you know, people will lose interest. So I find that quite interesting. But I don't know, sometimes I find that people say, you know, I have a platform and it's not curated, it's raw and it's honest, but actually it's like the most curated thing ever because these recordings or these stories or these reels or whatever that we're watching, they're kind of mini stories. So the way we storytell is very, very different, I think, now, and I actually have no idea how that will change. But it's all very interesting to me, and I try to like engage, like just test things out. Like I complain about TikTok, but I will post there, you know, just to test things out, you know. Blockchain technology as well. I at first didn't feel like I had any clue what I was doing, but I quite enjoy testing out, you know, minting my works on different platforms and see what will happen. because I'm quite excited to be part of something that's new for a change, you know, where I can include myself and not feel as excluded as I was in, for example, the architecture industry in the UK. You know, I didn't feel like I had a story to tell there. I didn't feel like nobody wanted to listen to a story of a Sudanese woman in a very male, white-dominated space. So in many ways now, I think digital tools allow you to tell your own story and still reach a huge audience that I think before maybe you wouldn't have. So yeah.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. That's very interesting. And you say you don't know what the future of storytelling will look like, but it sounds like you're a part of it. So I really appreciate that and you sharing that with us. This brings me to Vaishali and Rayan, you were mentioning, you know, that NFTs are now being used for all types of mediums, whether it's novels or literature or just paintings. I mean, Vaishali, can you imagine miniatures as NFTs, and how does that, I wonder how that ownership works, because I guess, is there ownership? Is there not? What's the future of storytelling in your opinion, Vaishali?
Future of storytelling. Well, first of all, storytelling in the present, not even the future, is fundamentally important. It's transformational, isn't it? It's the most powerful form of teaching and transmission, isn't it? It's the Shahrazad transforming Shahryar. It's Kalila Wa Dimna teaching the children. So I think that's going to stay. What may change, as Rayan was saying, with NFTs is attention. The attention is an art, the art of attention, and then the idea of interruption, which is it's built into things like the Knights and Kalila, because these are in terms of a framework of nested tales. There is constant interruption built in to it, isn't it? Which is actually holding the structure together. It's a very strange paradox. You know, it's a literary thing, but to kind of hold in your head, the interruption gives it form and gives it shape. And I don't know how the future of storytelling will pan out, but I think our attention spans and interruption may be relevant for that somehow.
That's really interesting. The interruptions that I see them as the frames, right? The
yeah, precisely, yeah.
tales within the tales.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you see your own work evolving from here on out? Do you think you'll take anything with you from Kalila Wa Dimna along with you for future projects, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. The first thing is this format. I was trying to see if I could synthesize, you know, multiple heritages, painting traditions. Can I do a painting that incorporates all of them, the oils, the miniatures, Chinese? Can I do them all in one painting? And then kind of realizing I don't need to mesh them all together in one work. I can continue to spread them out and make a work that exists across multiple works, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It can exist kind of across in this way. It can exist in the back and the front, and the work exists kind of between, you know, in the gaps between. You kind of get a sense of the whole, and they only exist when they're together, not kind of separately. And the giant format and the scroll format, and actually in terms of storytelling, because miniature paintings, there's a whole massive history to them, and they were not always in books. They were sometimes used as, they were not always small either. They're sometimes used as backdrops for storytelling, you know, storytelling around a fire. The scroll format is very portable. You just kind of pick it up. That's your backdrop for an illiterate audience who are captivated by stories and they're looking at the pictures behind. I think that's a very valid function for art in general. So that's something I want to push a bit more for my own.
That's really interesting. I like that a lot. Yeah. And again, when I think of your piece, the gaps, right? Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. And so same question again, Rayan, do you think you'll be taking anything with you along the way in your future projects from Kalila Wa Dimna and from this exhibition as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that really excited me about this exhibition was before Kalila Wa Dimna, I was never involved in an exhibition or in a show that had this much diversity in like mediums. So we saw textiles, we saw, you know, Vaishali's beautiful paintings and miniatures, which I loved because she had kind of like, she had created a space with her artwork as well. And so it felt spatial as well. But there were so many different mediums, film as well. And I think it was really, really nice. It was really refreshing to see an exhibition where so many different mediums, colors, textures, you know, scales of artworks come together under all one theme. And that makes me want to definitely actually explore other mediums, you know, creating maybe physical works that are maybe, you know, based from my digital pieces, you know. It makes me kind of want to expand a little bit, and hopefully be involved in a lot more shows like that, because yeah, it's a lot more interesting. It's a lot, you meet people who are kind of experts within their fields or within their practices, and it's so different from what you're used to, and it really just expands the way you work and the way you think. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's lovely to hear. I like that a lot. And actually, it's really interesting because you talk of maybe experimenting with new mediums. And I know that, Jean, this was a bit of an experiment as well for you, because well, your specialty is creative writing. It's not necessarily visual arts, and yet you created a beautiful visual piece for us. So I wonder, is this something that you might keep experimenting with? Is there something else you might take with you along your path from this exhibition?
Well, yes, it was very strange for a wordy person like me to start collaging and using a scalpel. And, you know, I usually just read and type. That's about it. So, but I learned a lot in the process, you know, and just being in that strange, in a sort of strange space, it was like a kind of active migration. So it kind of mirrored what I was actually trying to portray. So it was useful, but I also thought, you know, just thinking about text in a three-dimensional way. So thinking about it visually, thinking about it orally, and also using different texts and splicing them together. I think it was very immersive, and it was fruitful and I hope impactful. And I think even as, you know, I kind of look forward to taking that with me into a classroom, actually. And that's yeah, so it's given me a bit.
I love that. That's a great idea. Do some visual work as well in the classroom. That I'm sure people will enjoy that. That's
yeah,
lovely.
exactly.
Yeah. I just want to remind everyone, feel free to start posting, not posting, but writing your questions in the chat if you like, just in preparation for our little Q&A at the end of this. But I'm just gonna come back, and since we were talking about, I guess it's interdisciplinary approaches, right? I wonder how, and I'm gonna ask this to you, Jane, again, and I'm just wondering, do you think that this kind of approach, like we call it interdisciplinary, but it's also collaborative, and do you think that what we did here between research arts and creative practices, how can that be, if it can be helpful in the context of inequality, specifically in our case, in the inequality of access to cultural and artistic spaces? How do you think that can be helpful, and if so, how?
Well, okay, I won't give the PhD version of the answer to that, because it's another really big question. But I mean, absolutely, I think we need to try and locate those histories and stories where different cultures converge. And I think when people feel included, when they feel seen, then they're more likely to participate. And so an emphasis on locating those narratives, I think, is you know, the short answer.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'd like to ask the same question again to Vaishali.
So, I mean,
so the interdisciplinary approach and collaborative approach, how can that maybe be helpful in the context of the unequal access we have at the moment to cultural and artistic spaces.
I mean, the first thing about the idea of interdisciplinaryism anyway, as if you're a person of multiple heritage and having lived, across two continents, I know no other way to be. I think the interdisciplinary approach is the only way forward for humanity, all of humanity. With regards to artistic spaces, well, one of the first things I thought was actually hearing Rayan's story, which struck me, for the artists themselves to be included in an exhibition where they feel seen and it's diverse and their story is given equal voice. I think that's a very important thing. So I'm of course supporting the audience, but also the artists themselves, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, completely. Yeah. And Rayan, yeah, because your experience maybe with the architectural sector and how you mentioned you felt left out. I wonder if obviously you use architectural tools, right, in your work. Do you see a future where you can apply this interdisciplinary approach to either your career as a teacher, as a professor in architecture, or maybe in other spaces to create more equal access?
Yeah, well, ever since kind of I left kind of a very traditional, like very consuming, like corporate setting and like practiced art more, I found that it was actually a lot easier to admit, oh, I'm not very good at this part. Like as artists, I think we're very familiar with having to be like your own marketing, your own accountant, your own artist, your own everything. But what's nice is that you kind of I don't know, I found that it was nice to be able to work with others. So now I work with engineers, and sometimes we hold workshops for children, for example. And it's quite nice to just be like, actually, I'm very good at doing digital renders, for example. I can tell you about magic realism and not feel pressure to constantly chase new information and retell it. And I find it quite liberating to be able to collaborate with others, and to be able to constantly meet new people and be in new spaces, and learn from others, just outside. It could be another engineer, it could be a painter, it could be a writer. And so for me, that is a very good way to include others, because it gives other people opportunities. And yeah, I mean, it's people before always talk to me about how, it's really important, to meet new people and talk to new people and people from other disciplines. But I never really understood that until I actually did that, even like with this exhibition, meeting artists who worked in completely different mediums. Like I said, it was very nice to see, but it's different from what I was used to, which is like either architecture only or like designers only. And yeah, it creates a more inclusive space, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate you saying this. I have to say, on a personal level, I mean, this project, I don't think people realize when they're coming on as a, from the outside, but this is a 3-year project that Rania, myself, and Rachel Scott, Dr. Rachel Scott, who has been the researcher partner on this project, we've been working on this for 3 years, and seeing it come to fruition, seeing all of your work be showcased, and we're very happy with how it's come out, and we're very proud of it. But also, I know that on a personal level, I very much relate to what you say, Rayan, because I feel like this project is 100% collaboration. It would not have been possible on an individual basis. I would not have been able to pull this off on my own. Rania and Rachel have been incredible and instrumental in this creation, but also all of you, the artists, the organizations, even the venue. You know, we pulled it together because it was a collaboration. And I think that's something that, like you said, Ryan, I also learned about myself, is that it's okay to just be like, I don't know how to do this, because then someone else shows up, you know, and can say, well, actually, I know how to do this. Maybe I can help you and you can help me with this. And this kind of brings me to my last question for the evening is I wonder if there's anything that you have learned about yourself, maybe about your heritage, or maybe simply about your skills through this entire process. Maybe Rayan, you want to answer?
Sorry to interrupt, just to bear the time, because people are also leaving. If we can also answer some of the Q&A.
Sure.
I think I had a question, but also Andy was asking Eugene about your title for your PhD thesis.
Got to unmute.
Yeah.
So it's a really long PhD title, and I have a much catchier one for the book, which hopefully will make it out at some point. It's called, do you know what? It's not even coming to mind because I've got a new one swimming around in my head. It's called Promised Lands: Narrativizing Violence, Identity, and Women's Lives Under the Spanish Inquisition between 1470 and 1525. I will write.
I'm guessing, Jean, can you write it down on the chat? That would be
not very
that would be helpful for everyone. If you can write it down on the chat.
Yeah.
Because I think the interest is in migration, and it would be nice for him to locate your work.
Yeah. I will do
okay.
keep in touch and let me know your thoughts.
Yes. Rahila is asking, how did the artist get chosen? That's also in relation to the theme, story within a story, layer by layer, because we started, Zalia and I, actually the project was based on the research on Kalila Wa Dimna, and we thought, how can we make Kalila Wa Dimna relevant to today? It's a long travel text, but it's also unknown in certain areas. It's probably more known also in the Middle East. We have it as children books. So it all started there, and we thought, let's gather people that are willing to tell stories, personal, but also for the collective, you know, because many of the stories in the exhibition are about you know, issues that can be personal but collective at the same time. Another thing that we thought about is also involving organizations, and this is something we did not mention in the talk. Art entrenched in communities, again, in relation to access and representing voices. So we worked with Play for Progress. They work with asylum seekers, minor asylum seekers. We worked with the ELTA, East London Textile Arts, and they do a lot of textile work within the community, but they also try to approach, you know, high textile art and sharing high textile art skills, not, you know, one transient project. And this is why they had a very big section in the exhibition. Play for Progress approached it. Kalila Wa Dimna, they brought it to their music and art classes. So it was part of their half term with the minor asylum seekers. So the idea of the project is continuity. So this is on how the artist got chosen. Susan is asking, a book has margins and the cover, but the visual arts often break through the margins. Do you feel your work broke through any margin? Who would like to answer that? Okay, Vaishali, go ahead.
Yeah, I can. Hi, Susan. Thank you for the question. My work not only broke through the margins, it kind of leapt off the page completely, you know, didn't it? And then this idea of the gap, you know, the margin is a gap between, and it's also in a way a breathing space between one page and the next, and a space, a kind of almost like a brain dump space for an artist as well. But yeah, it just broke through so hard and fast that it became sculpture in a way, an installation. So it did this time, and the origami was this transition pieces from the page to the 3D kind of fold up to the ceiling. So it definitely broke through the page and the margins. Thanks for the question.
We have another question from Rahila, unless Jean or Rayan, you want to answer about breaking margins? I can move on to the next question. Otherwise.
I mean, yeah, I can say something briefly. I literally did use the book, so I cut pages from the book,
yeah,
and I framed them and I superimposed images on them. So the process was very much kind of getting rid of those margins. Yeah, and letting the text kind of wander around and experience different environments and meet with different texts. So it's my bit of margin breaking.
Absolutely. Ryan, shall I move on to the next question, or do you want to answer this as well?
I just want to say quickly that I was just thinking as everyone was speaking that I think sometimes whether it's a physical canvas or a digital canvas, it still has like somewhat of a margin or kind of restrictions. But I found it really interesting how most of us in the exhibition had stitched multiple pieces. So even with me, look, I had 3 pieces. I just couldn't keep it to one. You know, Vaishali and Jean, you know, we all had like either multiple pages that made up our piece, or in like Vaishali's case, installation. And I wonder if that's has something to do with the story. But yeah, that was just thinking out loud. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. There's a question that was sent to me directly, so it doesn't actually appear on this chat, but Julian wanted to know if we could hear a bit more about how, as artists, you responded to the story's emotional or affective dimension. The narrative impulse is generated by 2 emotions, hopeful trust and fear. Is this something that you responded to in your creative responses?
It's a small interruption before you guys answer. Jean, you haven't shared your title, did you? Can you just write it on the chat if you don't mind?
It's right there. Thank you, Jean. So the emotional approach, how did you respond to the emotional dimension of both hopeful trust and fear? Is that something that you felt in your process?
Yes, I would say when you're saying about the fear, it's this idea of running. I feel emotionally and I guess personally this idea of kind of running all the time, running kind of on the spot, not running and never meeting, running kind of almost pointlessly, running around in circles. So this is, I guess, very literally in my pieces. They're just on the run and never meeting. So that's, and in a way, when you run, even when you're running in a kind of a figurative way of fleeing or migrating, you're placing your trust in the process of running, aren't you? You don't have a destination. You might have a destination, but sometimes you don't have. You just running, and that is a trust in itself, isn't it?
That's fascinating.
Meaning that you're gonna be wherever you're gonna end up is going to be better than where you started off. So
Absolutely.
I guess the running for me, on an
that sounds a
emotional
lot.
level,
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just evident in my work, very literally, that on the run. So.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like what Jane was talking about when it comes to economic migrants, for example, that idea of wanting to find something better, trusting that, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jane, but it makes me think of your work. Yeah, Jean, I'd be curious to hear your take on that aspect, fear and hopeful trust.
I was slightly distracted by typing in the extremely long title of my PhD.
Sorry, do you want me to read it back to you? No problem at all. No, we just actually Julian was asking particularly about your comments on the psychology of the story. He thought that was quite fascinating, and he wanted to hear more about how all of you as artists had responded to the story's emotional dimension generated by hopeful trust and fear. Is this something you responded to in your creative process?
Very much so. I mean, it's something, the tale is really insightful on hopeful trust, particularly. I like that phrase. And there's another section of the tale that I didn't engage with, but I am really, it's still sort of haunting me, and that's a whole discussion on natural enmity. And you know, the crow really wants to befriend the mouse, and the mouse is saying, you know, listen, crows and mice do not get along, you know, you kill us and this friendship isn't going to happen. And you know, slowly they learn to, you know, the mouse learns to trust the crow. So yeah, that kind of, that hope, even you as a reader are engaging in that hope, you know, as you read. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can help but respond emotionally to the emotions in the text. I mean, that's one of the amazing things about the fables, is that it approaches you emotionally, and you feel, you know, you feel what the characters feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, good point, Vaishali. Again, our little interruptions. Yes, hi Roberta. We can share the recordings on our website, I think, right, Rania? Yeah, exactly. You can absolutely access that there. We have 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to encourage anyone who has any last questions to put them in the chat. Otherwise, maybe I can ask my question again, which is, I wonder if Rayan, Vaishali, Jean, have you learned anything about yourselves in this process that maybe you weren't expecting? It's just a little deep question at the end of this talk, you know. Let's go.
I can answer that briefly. It really made me think about all of the languages that I have lost, that my family has lost, and they range from Gaelic through to Arabic, Hebrew, Spanish, and yeah, I think yeah, I'm sort of immersed in a bit of grief about that, and I'm wondering how that might play into future research projects.
That's very interesting. I like that. What about you, Vaishali? Anything you learned about yourself?
Kind of in a similar way to Jean, that was nice, and I, because I have a lot of lost languages, I guess, in my own heritage and ancestry, but in terms of painting, just again this idea of you don't need to kind of artificially push synthesis. It can happen quite naturally. The art and the synthesis can exist between in the gaps. It doesn't have to be, okay, you're going to have to. I went to, let's to talk about, use a metaphor, a Korean Italian fusion, you know, food. And you could kind of imagine, it's really kind of forced. Actually, it was delicious, but it might have been awful, you know, it could have been really bad. And this idea of forcing something, you kind of have to let go of it. It doesn't have to be forced. It can kind of happen naturally as well. And yeah, so kind of let things exist in their own spaces, but also next to each other. So that, and this is about the margins as well, a little bit, I think, because you have a border, a margin, but you have things that exist just next to each other, and that's enough. It doesn't have to be, all right, we have to sew everything and mesh everything together. It can be, they can exist quite happily in their own little spaces, discreetly, but the mixing happens on a kind of grander scale when you zoom out and look at it as a whole and kind of walk around. It's like kind of traveling somehow. So that, if that makes sense.
It does. It does very much so. Especially when we come from mixed heritages like you do. It's kind of, there's this almost, I mean, I'm talking from my perspective as a little mixie as well. It's true. There's this idea of like, I should be a blend of everything. I should be this perfect kind of mix, you know, that I can grasp all of it and yet, you know, adapt to each environment. But sometimes we don't, and sometimes, like you said, things just sit next to each other, and that's all right. That's all right. Rayan, any last words on this? Well, maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't, I don't know. Maybe you know yourself very well already.
No, I mean, like I said before, I think the exhibition, I already felt like I wanted to kind of experiment with new mediums, or kind of maybe break free a little bit from some of the skills that I already have. Like one of them is animating. I'm really keen on learning how to animate, and I've been putting off for the longest time. And maybe I don't know, this exhibition made me feel like, you know, that it's possible, I guess, or, you know, it is, I should, you know, just go for it. So that's one thing, that it's okay to take your time as well, trying to acquire these new skills, especially because lately I've been learning the lesson of, we were talking about, social media, and like how, we're used to just consuming so much information so quickly. And I think that affected how much I was rushing some of my works, or felt the pressure to create work very, very quickly. And so now I'm just, trying to teach myself that it's okay to take a lot more time doing a piece, because it might just be bigger, or it might just become 3 pieces instead of 1, like it kind of did with this exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a good message for everyone, I think. Let's try and be okay with taking the time we need to take. I wonder, okay, so I think we're going to be wrapping up soon. If anyone has any last minute questions, now is your chance. Rania, do you have a question for our artists that you would like to ask, or are you fully satisfied with all of this?
Actually, that was a really, really nice discussion. I was nodding all the time. I don't have a question. I don't want to make it long on everyone, but I will say, I was writing that. I can say it orally. I was saying that keep an eye on the website, because during the exhibition and after, we'll keep sharing content, honoring the importance of the archive and voices, as we mentioned here. So we will keep sharing content, and we hope that this project will bring continuity to all the artists and organizations. Yeah, this is what I wanted to say.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Rayan. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Vaishali. It's such an honor to be here and to be able to have these amazing conversations. And thank you to all of you who joined us. It's been a pleasure. And as Rania said, just go on the website if you want any more information. Check out our artists' pages. There are links to all of their work and their own websites there, so you can jump from there. And you'll see all the information on the website as well for future events. There will be talks coming up as well, and a few also in-person events still happening at the gallery, which we'll let you check out as well. I think we're all good. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, recordings will be on the website in a couple days. So if you've missed part of it, no worries. We have it all here. All
and
right.
Thank you, Jean and Rayan and Vaishali. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.